We will get to hear how that will be working, but I'll leave that to others to comment on, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Carmel Sepulou.
Mr Speaker, I stand to rise on the Courts and Criminal Matters Bill, and following on from my colleague Carol Beaumont, I think she did a good job of going into the technical aspects of the bill, so I'll speak more broadly to it, Mr Speaker. Labor does support the Courts and Criminal Matters Bill, and Mr Speaker, as many of the other members who have stood tonight have said, it does result from work that was undertaken while Labor was in government, so it is good to see this finally moving along that path to being put through. We do continue to wonder why it has taken so long, Mr Speaker. That is one of our concerns. Why is it taking so long for this bill to pass? It was practically ready when Labor left government, and given that National often stresses their tough on crime credentials, it is hard to understand why they wouldn't fast-track this piece of legislation. It did have its second reading on the 16th of November 2010, so the rhetoric that we often hear about the need to be tough on crime, to be seen to be tough on crime, is really reduced to nothing when we look at the fact that this has taken so long to come through, and it's not the only piece of legislation that this is the case for, Mr Speaker. I only need look at the order paper and I see a very, very important bill that was put up by Labor, that it was widely consulted on within the sector concerned, and that was the Domestic Violence Reform Bill. And that still continues to languish at the bottom of the order paper. In fact, it's second to last, Mr Speaker. It's at number 58. So it's concerning that we, during this term, probably, well, almost definitely, I think, won't get an opportunity to consider that very, very important piece of legislation. So I guess that's just another example where the rhetoric doesn't really fit with the action with respect to being tough on crime. Another bill, as I said, the Domestic Violence Reform Bill, that isn't being considered, that the Minister of Justice doesn't seem to take seriously, unfortunately doesn't seem to understand that domestic violence is a very important issue that should be taken seriously through legislation and through this process. The government does continue to take a piecemeal approach to reforms in the justice sector with no coherent plan or vision on strengthening the system and providing improved services to the public. And that's concerning, Mr Speaker, that it is a piecemeal approach, that there's something happening over here, something happening over here, but there's no consistency, there's no overall plan from this government with regards to justice. And unfortunately, that lack of plan does extend to other areas, including the lack of plan that the national government has demonstrated with respect to the economy, with respect to moving New Zealand forward, with respect to jobs, Mr Speaker, with respect to opportunities for training, Mr Speaker, a lack of plan with regards to justice and what they hope to see, a piecemeal approach to reforms in the justice sector is really just symptomatic of a lack of plan in general by the national government. This bill omits some proposals developed by Labor. For instance, we wanted to create a single agency to have responsibility for fines. Currently there are 80+ issuing authorities, and this impedes the collection of fines, and National have not adopted this sensible policy. That was a sensible policy. We really struggle to understand why the government wouldn't want to take that on board. 80+ agencies, 80+ authorities involved in the collection of fines, hardly the tight ship, hardly the kind of smartest way for this to be dealt with. Labor recognised that. Labor proposed that we create a single agency, and yet that proposal has been ignored. Doesn't really seem to make sense at all to ignore that, Mr Speaker, and it is unfortunate because one would think that things would be much more consistent, that there would be much smoother running of things if it was condensed to one agency rather than have collections spread over 80 different authorities. The Justice Ministry research shows that when people cross a certain threshold of money owed, around $2,000 for young people, they become unable and unwilling to even attempt to pay off their fines. And actually, the research for that goes back some 10 years. I was looking at a couple of reports, Mr. Speaker. One of them right here, actually 2005, and the report was called Young People and Infringement Fines, a qualitative study prepared for the Ministry of Justice by Litmus Limited, and that was back in October 2005. But one of the quotes from that really does support what I've just said about young people building up fines, and then all of a sudden it just becomes too difficult to pay any of them. And a quote from one young person was, "When I had a few fines, I tried really hard to pay them off. Once they get out of control, they melt up, and you can't see any way of clearing them, so you give up." And that was a young person who had numerous infringement fines. So it is a concern that when young people cross, or when people cross a certain threshold of money owed, around $2,000 to young people, they become unable and unwilling to even attempt to pay off their fines. Through the fines register established by this bill, lending companies and the wider community will be made aware of people who owe money, and this will pressure people to pay fines that they might otherwise be able to avoid. But I guess, we do need to take into consideration is that we are in tough times at the moment, Mr. Speaker, and if there ever was going to be a time where fines were going to be less of a priority, it would be at this point in time when people are struggling to pay the bare necessities, like put food on the table, Mr. Speaker. And actually, having observed the justice, the law and order policies that have been brought in over the last 2.5 years under the national government, I must say that what I've noticed is that there has been an increase in the punitive measures, particularly with things like fines. Now, on paper it looks good. To the public, often they think, yes, fine them more, fine them more. But the reality is that really worthwhile when it's so difficult to collect it so often, and does it really make a difference when you see from young people, like I've just quoted from, that once it gets to a certain point, they don't even attempt to because it all becomes too difficult. So we do believe that there needs to be a much more concerted attempt to collect the fines, but we also do, well, I personally also am sceptical about some of the increases that have been put on fines, some of the extensions that have been made by the national government, and just concerned that really on paper it looks harsh, but in reality very little is happening there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's good to see in the commentary on the bill that it's recognised that this bill, the development of which commenced under the previous government, actually represents the most comprehensive legislative improvements for the recovery of unpaid fines, reparation and civil debt in 12 years. So I think that the Labor government and the ministers of that time do need to be commended for the work that they put into this. I am, along with my colleagues, we're of course happy to see that this is actually moving along now, rather than languishing on that order paper as it was before. And Mr. Speaker, although we are disappointed that certain things have been left out, particularly the omission of the one single agency that we had recommended be established to be responsible for fines, that has now been excluded. We're disappointed that has happened, but happy that this is finally getting somewhere, Mr. Speaker. So thank you very much.
I call